everyone. Welcome to a special episode of Home But Not Alone. And I say special because not only do we have an amazing guest, but we are steering away from the original concept of HBNA. For the past week, there has been a series of ongoing protests and riots against police brutality around the world. The protests were sparked after the death of George Floyd, an unarmed black man whose life was taken while being arrested by police officers in Minneapolis. His arrest was captured on a cell phone video showing a white police officer kneeling on his neck for several minutes. This event brought the United States and several other countries into a frenzy, as they and we have reached a boiling point when it comes to racial injustice. Today, my guest is Megan Neaves. She is the first president of Nova Scotia Association of Teachers for Equity in Education. She is the executive director of Impowered Community Engagement and Consulting, an organization that aims to empower people to break the cycle of systematic racism in Nova Scotia. Megan is a junior high teacher in Halifax. She has recently completed her Master of Education in supporting diverse learners with the needs and exceptionalities. But she is also returning to the Mount St. Vincent University in September 2020 to begin a Master in Educational Foundation, specializing in anti-racist education. Thank you for making time for me so late. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So tell me, how are you?
I'm okay. I'm kind of tired. I've been really busy. There's more white people than ever reaching out to me, inquiring on what they can do to be better allies in the Black Lives Matter movement, and trying to seek knowledge and advice and things and resources to educate themselves. So it's really empowering, and I love seeing that. It's just been a really busy time, but an optimistic one.
That's awesome. So, I myself was in a shock when I saw the video. I was in a shock, but almost not even surprised. And that's just because I've been so used to, it's sad for me to use the word used to, but it wasn't a surprise to see a police officer using extreme force on another black man while being arrested. And I want to know what were your initial reaction to George Floyd's death?
Right. So I read about it first. It took me a little bit to watch the video, just because it's not the first time that this has happened. There's so many videos circulating out there. It also happens in Canada, which I have studied and been aware of prior to this. So like you, I was unfortunately not surprised. I was disgusted. I did watch the video, and I don't really have words to tell you how I felt. I felt really upset for him, and sad and disappointed, and so I don't know. I don't really have words to tell you how I felt. I was disheartened, but with the videos, it's not that it's anything new. It's just like Will Smith, I think it was, who said it. It's just being filmed now because we all have access to a device or a camera or something to present it.
Mm-hmm. And like you and I said, it wasn't the first time we were exposed or seen such graphic videos of a black man being taken advantage of by being unarmed. So what was it? What is it about this incident that brought people to their boiling point? What do you think it is?
I think, honestly, there's been many videos shared of this stuff already, but I think that right now people are using social media more than ever because of quarantine times, and so more people are tuned in, and so it's becoming almost trending to kind of create awareness about this particular topic, and more viewers and more people are paying attention. So it is a time that, people have seen videos like this before, but it's just more people have things to say about it now that they have more voice, I guess, or platforms to do it, because everyone's on social media.
Right. So what does it say about the magnitude of that event, that people are willing to leave their house in quarantine time, where we're preaching social distancing, to come and get together to unite and fight for the cause? What does that say to you, and where we're heading as a nation or a society?
Well, it makes me optimistic. I've seen more people at this recent protest, just the kneeling protest on Spring Garden Road there on Parkway Mall, than I've ever seen at any protest that I've ever attended in Halifax thus far. And I've seen a lot of white people in solidarity with people of color. And usually when I go to these protests, sometimes you see like kind of the same faces all the time, but I've seen brand new faces that I'd never seen before, and the whole street was packed. So it was extremely empowering. And it was an amazing vibe, and everybody was getting along really well and listening and in solidarity. So it makes me optimistic that people are listening and they're paying attention and they see it as a priority over everything else right now. We need to stop what we're doing and we need to make change happen right now. So yeah.
I love it. I love the fact that you said people are making it a priority, because it is a priority. I think people who don't know me, Junior Marku, and I started a social enterprise called Save Me, Save We. And the beliefs and the foundation of the company are in the words of the company itself: save me, save we. We are products of our environment. And by being a product of your environment, if you allow your brothers and sisters to be murdered in front of you, not taking action, then what does that say to you? What does that say to the person next up? And seeing the outcome that Halifax had, where so many people from different race came together and actually protest this, was amazing. It was inspiring. It gave me hope. But Halifax was fortunate to have a very peaceful protest, and other parts of the world, like the United States, Minneapolis, Houston, LA, have had rioting and looting. I don't want you to choose a side on any of this, but what do you think is the idea or the ideology, or the reason why people are so frustrated to the point of breaking and entering and stealing from properties?
So a lot of it actually kind of angers me when I see on different statuses people commenting on this and saying, I don't understand how this solves anything. We're just destroying cities and we're setting them on fire and everything like that. Well, nobody was happy with peaceful protest prior to that either. Colin Kaepernick taking a knee, they were offended by that. So once people of color have been fighting and like telling people about these issues for hundreds and hundreds of years. So when they're not, and all of a sudden when they see things on fire and everything, they want to listen because it seems more of a state of emergency, as if it wasn't a state of emergency when a Black man was murdered. That should have been the state of emergency the first time, but this has been happened way too many times. So if you have the city up in flames, not to justify that, it shows the emergency state that we're in right now, that, we can't let this happen again, and people need to listen. And and even with our protests in Halifax here, like when we went, we had the protest, we kneeled to honor George Floyd, but then on top of that, afterwards, people were upset that we played music, and that there was, certain lyrics in the music that they were offended by. But at the end of the day, when I was looking around, I was like, wow, I'm really proud of Halifax. Look at how many people are coming together and vibing, and they're dancing together and in unity for the same cause, holding up their posters without violence, without rioting and things like that. And still people are angry. So it's just, it's just no matter what you do, somebody is offended in some way or another. So I was proud of Halifax for our protest, and anybody who was not or had an issue with it should look around and see how everyone else is doing it.
Right, no, exactly. Like I said in the past, if you can try to do anything great, you can do a little bit, people are not going to be happy. You can do too much, people are not going to be happy. You can do just a little, you can just enough, people are not going to be happy. And that's for whatever reasons people hold opinions to. Like for me, for example, with the mental health initiative, if I do too little, some people are not too happy. If I do too much, it bothers people. If I do just enough, this still doesn't make people happy, right? So it's always a matter of intentions. And I believe the organizers of the protest, the kneeling protest in Halifax, did a great job. They should have nothing to worry about and to move on, because we are approaching it our way, and an effective way, which was peaceful, and it got people across. So let's talk a little bit about racism, all right? Some people are oblivious to the fact that there is systematic racism in Canada, and even worse in Halifax. So why do you think there is white people who still have difficulty recognizing their white privileges?
Well, based on my own experience growing up in a predominantly white middle-class neighborhood, And for many in our education system, I was never taught about the Black Loyalists, for example, and their experiences, or the Shelburne riots, or that slaves were auctioned off here in Halifax. When we were taught history, we're taught from the Eurocentric perspective, meaning that it's taught through a European lens of their perception of how history happens, but we're not told the truth about Black history. And so oftentimes when we learn about slavery, we learn about the fact that we had the Underground Railroad in Canada, and that slaves came here to escape slavery. And so we view Canada as like a safe haven for people of color, when really, if we were taught that, for example, generational wealth, the Black Loyalists, when they arrived in Canada in 1783, there was over 3,000, and they were promised, for fighting in the American Revolutionary War to side with the British, they were promised like 200 acres of land and housing. And when they got here, they didn't receive what they were promised, and very little people got any land, and the land that they were given was full of rocks and shrubs and things like that, so it was very difficult to build on. Plus they had no tools or resources to be able to do that, and then so that was difficult. And then finally, once they dug it all up and did all the work and were able to build some houses on there, the white people in the communities were upset because people of color were getting jobs, because they were getting paid a quarter of what the white people would get paid. And so therefore, business owners would want to hire people of color because they would profit more. They wouldn't have to pay white people as much. So people that were white, that were struggling, got upset and started the Shelburne riots and started burning down all the houses that the people of color had worked so hard to build. And then, and then we see Africville, where again, they become self-sufficient in society. They have their own house and their own land, and they don't need the government for things, and then the government bulldozed down their home and forced them into public housing. So if we're taught the truth about history, then we can understand why our predominantly Black neighborhoods are still suffering from poverty today, and we can understand the linkages towards how incidents in history have forced them into those complexes, and the fact that white people had the privilege to be able to pass on generational wealth to their ancestors and the people coming in front of them. So, for example, being able to pass down land or houses because they weren't burned down or bulldozed down during, these systemic racist times. So it's just, Black people always had to start from scratch, and if people understood kind of how our white ancestors contributed to the oppression of Black people and how they're still impacted today, then we'll be more empowered to recognize our privilege and be more empowered to use our privilege to create change and speak out about these issues and pass on this knowledge to other white people, so that way we can come up with a solution. Because Black people didn't invent racism, white people did, and that's something Lynn Jones will always say, is the fact that we're constantly asking Black people to what should we do to fix this issue. But the thing is, it's like, why should Black people fix this issue when white people are the one who's created it? So that's why we have a responsibility to make change.
No, that's awesome. That's a very in-depth answer, and educating me on things I don't even know. So when it comes to systematic racism, how early do you believe people should be educated? Because like you said, people are never taught about the Shelburne riots, or they're only taught about the Underground Railroad and all those stuff. Same for me. I went to school in Ontario, and they only talked to us about a few people. Actually, matter of fact, let me go back a little bit. One of the first conversations I ever had with you, you shed light to the fact that in elementary schools, we were only taught, Black people were only ever seen in a not dominant way. They only talked about Black people as slaves and people who, I don't know, what's the word that you would use for in this?
Well, they were, instead of so they were always kind of taught as Black people in inferior positions.
Yes, exactly, an inferior position.
Yeah. So yeah.
So yeah, so like you were saying, I was like, man, you are right. Like I would be in my classroom, and all of a sudden, the only Black guy we could look up to was like Samuel de Champlain or Samuel de Costa, and that was the only person we could look up to. But everybody else we were taught about were inferior race, right? So it was like me after we all listen to this in the classroom, we go into the playground and play, right? I could see it through the eyes of all my friends that I meant less than them, right? Because never did we go in the classroom and they were like, man, this is how great, or these are the great things Black people have done that made me feel comfortable or made me feel empowered in my own chair in the classroom, right? So
Right.
after that conversation we had, I realized, I'm like, man, how many things have I done, right, to make a white person at ease, like growing up, right?
Right.
To the point where it's just like my name, right? People call me Junior, but my real name's Maywan. And even when it started at schools, instead of having educators who were like my either my teacher or my sub teacher be like, hey, going through the roll call, instead of trying to say Maywan with a straight face, they had to be like, oh, duh, this is gonna be like, and they had to make a big deal, making me feel uncomfortable, knowing that when I present myself to an authority figure, somebody older than me trying to get a job, I can't go with Maywan because that person will not feel comfortable, right? So when you told me that in the past, I was like, man, they shed a lot of light on what white privilege without even thinking about white privilege, but like just the fact that the difficulty um we have at a young age in the classroom. So yeah, can you talk about a little bit how crucial it is at a young age to talk about systematic racism and how to empower Black people in the history books?
Okay, well, like you just said, you didn't even recognize kind of how that was systemically racist. And so that's why it's so important too to tell the truth about history and to include many perspectives throughout history, because it's just as important for children of color to learn about their history and their ancestors as resilient as opposed to always being oppressed by Black people, for example. So, you know, learning about some of the famous inventors or the activists or William Hall or some of the people in Nova Scotia who really paved the way for Black Canadians, and to be proud of that history. But again, if it's from the Eurocentric perspective and that's what it's told, that's often going to play in the subconscious minds of children of color, because if they only see themselves in positions of inferiority, then they might think that's all that they're capable of, as opposed to being proud of those resilient leaders that paved the way so that they can also lead and not have it ingrained in their subconscious that they are people that have been oppressed and have always been held down by people that are not of color. So I think that so when you go back to the question of how early should we learn, I think that we need to start telling them the roles and the important roles in Canadian history that people of color have played, but also tell them the truth about how that they were treated and the reasons that their communities are placed where they're at today, and the why things are the way that they are, so that they can be more I guess empowered to speak out about these issues and to identify them, so that it's not ingrained in their subconscious, but they're conscious of it, so that they can create change and speak out and advocate for themselves.
Hmm. No, I love it. One thing about like feeling inferiority or feeling like we are not being taught about successful Black people or Black educators or Black activists. Growing up, me and my Black friends, we never, because of how the system was being taught, the educational system was being taught, we would never say we want to be just like this person. We would never say that. We would always have to say, I want to be the first of this person. And growing up, you realize you weren't the first, you were just never taught about it, right? But other people in my class would be like, I want to be, I'm exaggerating, like Neil Armstrong or something, right? Because we are taught about that person. So growing up, we never had people to aspire to be like. We always have to think, I have to be the first. And when you have to be the first for something, you're a trailblazer. You're the one creating the path. You don't have nothing to look up to, which just makes things a lot more difficult, makes the journey a lot more difficult. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Can we talk about a little bit about what can a white person do to take action? People are holding up signs, Black Lives Matters, even though they are not from African descent. And some people, some white people and people from other races are like, should I be doing this? Is it okay for me to do that? Can you talk for the white people who are willing to support, and for those who are just neutral, what they can do to take action in these times?
So first, we can't stay neutral. We have to speak out. Part of white privilege comes voice, and so that's a huge thing. And so, I encourage everybody to use their white privilege to create change. And that's part of my privilege of speaking at these issues, is that sometimes it's easier or it's more acceptable, or I'm seen as a leader when I speak out about these issues, as opposed to somebody who is of color speaking about these issues, and then they're seen as using the black card or making excuses. So that's why it's so important for white people to advocate and stand up against these issues. So I have some steps that I would suggest that white people do during this time. Is number one, they need to educate themselves. People of color, I know that a lot of people mean well and they're well intentioned when they reach out to people of color to ask them what they can do to be better, or to be more aware, or to what resources. But at this time, people of color are exhausted, and they shouldn't have to educate white people on how to treat them with respect. So educating yourself, and then having conversations amongst your loved ones with other white people about anti-racism, the Black Lives Matter movement, things like that. Doing lots of reading. So I would suggest, like, for example, a book I would recommend is Policing Black Lives by Robin Maynard, to just recognize that, Black Lives Matter is a big association within Canada that is relevant as well because of all the statistics in relation to that. And there are Black men who have been killed by Canadian police as well, and to educate themselves on why this is relevant and how it harms the people of color here. But also, even just critical thinking. Like, number one is, like, we all, as people of color and white people, we all may have prejudiced thoughts, but we get those thoughts from, like, the media or maybe family members or anything like that teach that to us. And so if we're getting, and I would say too, the officers that are killing the Black men, oftentimes we're taught to fear Black communities by the way that they're represented in the media. So we have this fear, and we're not critically thinking about, the validity of that fear of people of color, then that's where it becomes really dangerous. So, for example, I don't think officers are going out and seeing, how many Black people can I kill today? It's more so they see Black people as a threat because of how the stereotypes portray them throughout the media. So we need to critically think about our first thought. So recognizing and being conscious of our first thought. And they may be a racist thought, but using those critical thinking skills to question the validity of those thoughts before they become actions. So before, it's too late. So that's number one. And embrace the discomfort of having those conversations, because it is uncomfortable to have conversations about race, especially.
But it's not excruciating. It's difficult, but not excruciating.
Right, and it's not going to kill you, where there's actually Black people being killed because these conversations are not being had because people are uneducated about these things, and they have this fear. So we need to just deconstruct this culture by kind of having conversations about it, sharing what we learn with others. You can also use your positions in society, because we know that many white males predominantly take up a lot of the leadership positions within our society, but using those positions to create change in legislations and policies that don't represent the Black perspective or are keeping them oppressed, and incorporating more Black perspectives within that. And also, there's a Black Lives Matter Solidarity Fund within Halifax that was organized by some community activists like Lynn Jones, Twyla Gross, Elle Jones, Rachel Zellers, and you can literally go Google Black Lives Matter Solidarity Fund. You can donate to that if you'd like to make a donation. So it's all about constantly educating yourself and keeping up to date, because even though I did my master's in supporting diverse learners with needs and exceptionalities and accumulated an array of research about white privilege and implementing anti-racist education, I'm still returning to school in September to do a master's focused on anti-racist education, because I know that as a white person, I need to constantly be educating myself. It's not something that you just stop educating and then all of a sudden you are that conscious white person.
I love the part where you say it's about educating, reading, staying informed, and acting beyond just acting beyond from the reading. Is having those conversations with people, right? So when so when is it the right time for somebody to approach somebody about about this topic? Because I know here's how I believe things should be done. It's like people run away when you try to chase them. Like you see those signs on the streets like Jesus is coming back type of thing, right? It's like people who are in your face type of thing. So when is it the right time for somebody to actually speak up and defend the Black Lives Matter movement?
At every moment, if you are a witness to racism or even a racist thought, like where in people that are not of color, for example, you might be around family members that say something that's very stereotypical about a community, which is actually adding to those, and it's reinforcing stereotypes that become really dangerous. So calling those people out and making it unacceptable for them to say that around you. And that's why I encourage you to speak to people that love you, like your loved ones. Start with your family members and things like that, and educate them about that. It's our privilege to be unaware of these issues or to be unaffected by them. So we need to do the work and educate ourselves, but also call out people when they're wrong and embrace those discomfortable conversations, because at least that person unconditionally loves you. So if they don't live you right at that moment, you have to make it so that in order for them to kind of still be in your presence and still have a relationship with you, they need to be ready to listen and to value that as well as you do. And you got to kind of make that come with you. And so that's one thing, because like I said, or whatever, we are the ones that need to deconstruct these racist ideas and ideologies that become dangerous. So we need to do the work and not ask people of color to, tell us what to do.
Perfect. I love it. All right. So moving forward, how can someone support beyond social media?
I think it's the same kind of thing as we were just saying. I see a lot of people more than ever on my Facebook sharing posts about recognizing their white privilege, black solidarity, all these different things, anti-racist things. And I think too, unfortunately, I hope it's not just because it's trending right now and it's a hot topic. And it's not going to just end when, with the protest. We need to continue to do that work. Even if you go to the protest in solidarity, what are you going to do when you go home? And make plans as to, how can you incorporate it in your field of work, for example, to create change in policies, because it is the systems that kind of govern our society that add to the oppression of people of color in Nova Scotia. But without recognizing your white privilege and actually doing the work to understand what that looks like in Nova Scotia, how do we fix problems that we don't know exist? We need to do the research. And so, for example, I'll just give 5 quick facts about, why people might not think that they might wonder why people of color in Halifax are so concerned about stuff that happens in the States. Well, like I was telling you before, it happens here in Nova Scotia. It happens here in Canada. So, for example, Black people, we had the Scott Wortley report that came out just last year that stated Black people in Halifax were 6 times more likely to be stopped by police. But it wasn't because Black people are committing more crimes than others. It was that they were being over-policed in the predominantly Black communities. And between 2000 and 2017, Canadian police were involved in at least 460 fatal conflicts with civilians. Black people in Toronto are 20 times more likely to be shot dead by police. 1/3 of the victims shot by RCMP between 2007 and 2017 were Indigenous. And the Black community only makes up 3.4% of Canada's whole population, but yet they are 9% of police fatalities. So this is an issue here. And that's why people are scared and they're angry and they're anxious, because we need to do something before, we have to do something now because there are unarmed Black men who were killed, but just so that this never happens again.
Okay. So this kind of wraps up the interview. But I saw something last night, and it was a TikTok that showed you know who Allison Holker is?
No.
Her and her husband is Black, and they did a TikTok where it said white privilege, their white privileges, right? So they hold up 10 fingers while somebody asks them a question, and if you have not experienced it, then you keep a finger up. If you have, you put a finger down, right? And I want us to do this challenge, right? And we're gonna hold up 10 fingers, and I want to think about it in Nova Scotia or in Halifax, and I wanted to make it Nova Scotia and Halifax related, all right? Does that sound cool with you?
Right. But based on my personal experience?
Yeah, based on your personal experience. We're gonna put our fingers up.
Put a finger down. Check
right
your
now.
privilege edition. Put a finger down if you have been called a racial slur. Put a finger down if you've been followed in a store unnecessarily. Put a finger down if someone has crossed the street to avoid passing you. Put a finger down if you've had someone clench their purse in an elevator with you. Put a finger down if you've had someone step off of an elevator to keep from riding with you. Put a finger down if you've been accused of not being able to afford something expensive. Put a finger down if you have had fear in your heart when being stopped by the police. Put a finger down if you have never been given a pass on a citation that you deserved. Put a finger down if you have been stopped or detained by police for no valid reason. Put a finger down if you have been bullied solely because of your race. Put a finger down if you have been denied service solely because of the color of your skin. Put a finger down if you've ever had to teach your child how not to get killed by the police. Any fingers left? That's privilege.
So I have 0 fingers, and you have 8 left. So
But I want to mention that if I was a white person that did not have many Black friends and things like that, that I probably wouldn't have been stopped by the police for no reason. And it was, and when I'm by myself, I don't get stopped by the police for no reason. But so that's one of the ones I put my hand down for, or finger down for, and it's because I was with a person of color, and and they would often ask me if I'm pulled over with a person of color. They would always ask me if I was okay.
Wow. And that has happened to me in the past as well, where they always ask the girl, are you being forced against your will? And that's happened in Wolfville, Nova Scotia. I've been pulled over in Wolfville, Nova Scotia. They checked my trunk for no reason while I was in front of my house, and then they let me go.
But they need a warrant for that.
Exactly. But what am I going to say when somebody has a gun in front of me, right? And so the next day or two, I went straight to the police office and I yelled at their Black cop. I said, there's no way that one of your officers, one of your comrades is doing that to one of us. It's unacceptable. I know my rights. I know what they're allowed to do. But how am I going to say no when I'm put in such a vulnerable position, right? So for those who don't believe white privileges are right, are white, well, there's not systematic racism in Nova Scotia. There is. It's just time for us to educate ourselves and be aware of our surroundings and what is happening to us. So yeah, that concludes the interview. I thank you so much for taking the time of your day and doing this. I hope you stay tuned, and I hope we keep in contact.